Sarah Chen pressed her forehead against the cold train window and watched the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red. Christmas Eve, and here she was, alone on the 6:47 southbound train, clutching a cardboard box that held 3 years of her life at Morrison & Associates. The law firm had let her go that morning. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal. She'd nodded, signed the papers, and walked out with her desk plant still sitting on the conference room table because she couldn't bear to carry one more thing. The train rocked gently as it picked up speed. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to ignore the festive chatter of families around her, their shopping bags rustling with wrapped presents and holiday cheer. Her phone buzzed. Another text from her mother asking what time she'd arrive for dinner. Sarah hadn't told her about the job yet. Couldn't face typing those words on Christmas Eve. Instead, she'd sent a vague message about running late and silenced her phone. When she opened her eyes again, something felt wrong. The buildings outside looked unfamiliar. The usual landmarks weren't appearing. Sarah sat up straighter, her heart beginning to pound. She checked the digital display above the door. Pinewood Station. Next stop, Millbrook End. She'd never heard of either place. Panic seized her chest. She'd fallen asleep. Somehow, impossibly, she'd missed her stop and 3 others beyond it. The train slowed, its brakes squealing against frozen tracks. Sarah grabbed her box and stumbled toward the doors as they hissed open. Cold air rushed in, carrying snowflakes that melted instantly on her cheeks. She stepped onto the platform, and the train pulled away behind her, its red lights disappearing into the darkness. The station was small, barely more than a covered platform with a single bench and a flickering lamp. No ticket office. No other passengers. Just Sarah, her box, and the falling snow. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Of course. She was in the middle of nowhere, miles from home, on Christmas Eve. The irony would have been funny if she weren't so terrified. Sarah looked around desperately. A narrow road led away from the station, lined with dark trees that swayed in the wind. In the distance, she could see warm lights twinkling through the snow. A town. There had to be someone there who could help her. She started walking, her heels clicking awkwardly on the icy pavement. The box grew heavier with each step, and she considered leaving it by the roadside. What did it matter now? Her nameplate, a coffee mug with a sarcastic quote, a framed photo of her college graduation. Objects from a life that had just fallen apart. But something stubborn in her refused to let go. She'd carried it this far. The walk felt endless. Snow gathered on her coat and in her hair. Her toes went numb inside her impractical shoes. Just when she thought she might actually freeze to death on a country road on Christmas Eve, which would be a perfectly terrible end to a perfectly terrible day, she saw a building emerge from the snow. Not a house. A church. Its steeple reached up into the dark sky, and golden light poured from its tall windows. Music drifted out, voices singing a carol she recognized from childhood. Sarah stood at the edge of the property, shivering violently now, watching shadows move behind the stained glass. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere tonight. But she was freezing, lost, and out of options. She climbed the steps, her hand trembling as she reached for the heavy wooden door. It opened before she could touch it. A man stood there, older, with kind eyes and a surprised expression. "My dear," he said softly, "you look frozen through. Come in, quickly now." Sarah stepped inside, and the door closed behind her. The warmth hit Sarah like a physical force, making her skin tingle painfully as sensation returned to her frozen limbs. She stood dripping in the entryway of the church, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her mascara had probably run. Her expensive coat was soaked through. She was clutching a cardboard box like some kind of corporate refugee, which she supposed she was. The man who'd opened the door was watching her with concern. He wore a simple black sweater and had the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. "I'm Thomas," he said. "I help maintain the church. Let me take your coat." His voice carried the gentle authority of someone used to caring for others. Sarah hesitated, then let him help her out of the wet wool. He hung it carefully on a hook by an old radiator. "I missed my train stop," Sarah explained, her teeth still chattering. "I don't know where I am. My phone has no signal." The words tumbled out in a rush, and she hated how desperate she sounded. Thomas nodded as if lost strangers appeared at his door every Christmas Eve. "You're in Millbrook. Small town, bit off the beaten path. The next train won't come through until tomorrow afternoon, I'm afraid. But you're safe here. Come meet Father Michael. He'll want to help." Sarah followed Thomas down a hallway lined with photographs of church gatherings, past classrooms with tiny chairs, toward the sound of music. The singing had stopped, replaced by laughter and the clatter of dishes. They emerged into a large common room decorated with handmade paper chains and a slightly crooked Christmas tree. About 30 people filled the space, from elderly couples to young families with children racing between tables laden with food. A tall man with silver hair and a warm smile approached them. "Thomas, who's our guest?" He had the calm presence of someone comfortable in his own skin, in his own purpose. "Found her at the door, Father. Missed her train." Thomas glanced at Sarah. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Sarah. Sarah Chen." She clutched her box tighter, feeling out of place among these people who all seemed to know each other, who belonged here in this warm pocket of community. Father Michael's eyes crinkled with genuine welcome. "Sarah, you've arrived just in time for our Christmas Eve dinner. We're a small congregation, but we try to make sure no one spends tonight alone." He gestured to the crowded tables. "Please, join us. You must be hungry." Sarah wanted to refuse. She wanted to stay invisible, to not impose on these strangers. But her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl, and she realized she hadn't eaten since a tasteless granola bar at her desk that morning, before the meeting that ended her career. "I don't want to intrude," she said weakly. "Nonsense." An older woman appeared at Father Michael's elbow, wiping her hands on an apron decorated with dancing reindeer. She had steel-gray hair pulled into a bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through Sarah's careful composure. "I'm Margaret, and I won't hear of you going hungry. Thomas, take that box from her before she drops it. Sarah, come with me." Before Sarah could protest, Margaret had linked their arms and was guiding her toward a table where 2 empty chairs waited. "You'll sit with me and Rose. She's my daughter, teaches at the elementary school here. Rose, dear, this is Sarah. She's had a difficult journey tonight." Rose looked up from arranging napkins and smiled. She was younger than Sarah, maybe 25, with her mother's sharp eyes but a softer demeanor. "Welcome, Sarah. Mom's right, you do look like you've been through something." There was no judgment in her voice, only sympathy. A little boy appeared, barely 6 years old, and stared at Sarah with unabashed curiosity. "Why were you outside in the snow?" he asked. "Ethan, manners," Rose gently corrected him, but she looked at Sarah with the same question in her eyes. Sarah found herself explaining again, the words coming easier this time. Missing her stop. Getting off at an unfamiliar station. Walking through the snow. She left out the part about losing her job, about the crushing weight of failure that had made her careless enough to fall asleep in the first place. That was too raw, too personal to share with strangers. But as plates of food appeared before her, roasted chicken, buttery potatoes, vegetables that actually tasted like they'd been grown with care, Sarah felt something inside her begin to loosen. Margaret kept up a steady stream of warm conversation, asking gentle questions about where Sarah lived, what brought her to this area. Sarah answered vaguely, deflecting, but found herself listening more than talking. Margaret spoke about the town, about how everyone here looked out for each other, how they'd lost many young people to the cities but those who stayed built something worth having. "It's not perfect," Margaret said, spearing a green bean. "We're small, we're not wealthy, and sometimes we're too much in each other's business. But we're real with each other. That counts for something." Sarah thought about her apartment building, where she'd lived for 2 years and couldn't name a single neighbor. She thought about her colleagues at the firm, people she'd worked beside for 3 years and barely knew beyond their coffee orders. When had real become so rare? Ethan came back, carrying a small plate with a slice of pie. "This is for you," he announced proudly. "Grandma Margaret makes the best apple pie in the whole world." "The whole world, is it?" Margaret laughed. "That's quite a claim, young man." But when Sarah tasted it, the sweet and tart flavors perfectly balanced, the crust flaking just right, she thought maybe Ethan wasn't exaggerating. For the first time all day, she felt tears prick her eyes, and they weren't tears of sadness. After dinner, the tables were cleared with efficient teamwork that spoke of years of practice. Sarah offered to help, grateful for something to do with her hands, and found herself washing dishes alongside Rose in the church kitchen. The warm, soapy water felt therapeutic after the chaos of the day. "So what do you do, Sarah? Back in the city?" Rose asked, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn casserole dish. Sarah's hands stilled in the water. "I was a lawyer. Corporate law. Contracts, mergers, that sort of thing." The past tense felt strange on her tongue. "Was?" Rose caught the word immediately. There was no point in hiding it now. Sarah took a breath. "I got laid off this morning. Christmas Eve seemed like the perfect time for my employer to ruin my life. She tried to laugh, but it came out bitter. Rose set down the dish and turned to face her fully. I'm so sorry. That's cruel. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But maybe it's not your life they ruined. Maybe it's just the life you thought you were supposed to have. The insight was so unexpected, so direct, that Sarah found herself really looking at this young woman for the first time. You sound very sure about that. I'm a teacher, Rose said with a slight smile. I was supposed to be a doctor. Spent 2 years in medical school before I realized I was living my parents' dream, not mine. Dropping out felt like failure at the time. Now I can't imagine doing anything else. She gestured toward the common room, where Ethan and other children were playing. Those kids are my life. It's not prestigious, it doesn't pay much, but it's mine. Before Sarah could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway. Girls, finish up. Midnight service starts in 20 minutes. Sarah, you'll stay, won't you? I'm not really religious, Sarah began, but Margaret waved her hand dismissively. Neither are half the people out there if we're being honest. But Christmas Eve service isn't about perfection. It's about showing up when it's dark and trusting there's still light somewhere. She fixed Sarah with that piercing gaze. You've been in the dark all day, dear. Can't hurt to look for some light. The logic was irrefutable, or maybe Sarah was just too tired to argue. She dried her hands and followed Rose back to the main sanctuary. The pews had filled while they'd been in the kitchen. Families settled in, children wriggling with excitement despite the late hour. Someone had lit what seemed like 100 candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah slid into a pew near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. But Thomas appeared, offering her a program and a genuine smile. Glad you're staying, he said simply before moving on. The service began with hymns Sarah half remembered from childhood, back when her grandmother used to take her to church before she got too busy with school, then college, then career. The congregation's voices rose together, not perfect but earnest, filling the old building with sound that seemed to seep into Sarah's bones. She didn't sing along, just listened, letting the music wash over her. Father Michael's sermon was mercifully short and surprisingly relevant. He spoke about Mary and Joseph, refugees looking for shelter on the night everything changed. They were far from home, he said, far from their plans, living through something they never imagined. And in that displacement, in that uncertainty, something new was born. Sarah felt the words land somewhere deep in her chest. She'd spent the entire day seeing her situation as an ending. Getting fired. Missing her stop. Ending up lost and alone. But what if it wasn't an ending? What if it was just a terrible, uncomfortable, freezing cold beginning? The service moved into communion, and Sarah remained seated, watching others file forward. She noticed how Father Michael greeted each person individually, how he seemed to know their stories. Margaret took the elements with her head bowed. Rose guided Ethan forward, the boy's face solemn with the importance of the ritual. Even Thomas, who seemed more janitor than believer, approached with quiet reverence. Then came the candlelight portion. Starting from the front, flame passed from candle to candle, person to person, until the entire church glowed. When Rose turned to light Sarah's candle, their eyes met, and Sarah saw in that moment an offer of friendship, no strings attached. Silent night filled the space, and this time Sarah sang along, her voice cracking on the first words but growing stronger. She looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight, strangers who had fed her, welcomed her, made space for her without knowing anything about her except that she needed help. Her throat tightened with emotion. When had she last been in a room full of people who weren't competing with her or judging her or using her for their own advancement? When had she last felt like she could just be, without performing or proving or protecting herself? As the final notes of the carol faded, Father Michael raised his hands. Go in peace, he said. Carry this light with you into the world. Remember that even in the darkest night, we're never truly alone. People began to file out, their voices soft with the lateness of the hour and the sacredness of the moment. Sarah stood, uncertain what to do next. She had no hotel room, no way to get anywhere until tomorrow's train. The reality of her situation started to settle in again. Margaret appeared beside her as if summoned by anxiety. You're coming home with me, she announced. It wasn't a question. I have a spare room, and you're not spending Christmas Eve on a bench in the train station. I can't impose, Sarah started. You can and you will. Rose lives with me since she moved back to teach, so you'll have company. Besides, I make cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning, and it would be a shame for you to miss them. Sarah looked at this woman who owed her nothing, who was offering her shelter without hesitation. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Margaret's expression softened. "Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it. And because it's Christmas, and because you look like you need to remember that good people still exist." She patted Sarah's arm. "Come on, dear. Let's get you somewhere warm." Sarah woke to unfamiliar sounds, birds singing outside the window, the distant clatter of pots in a kitchen, Rose's soft laughter filtering up from downstairs. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The train. The snow. The church. Margaret's warm, cluttered guest room with its handmade quilts and shelves full of old books. She'd fallen asleep almost immediately last night, exhausted beyond measure. Now morning light streamed through lace curtains, and she could smell something wonderful baking. Cinnamon and sugar and butter, just as Margaret had promised. Sarah sat up slowly, running her hands through her tangled hair. Christmas morning. She should be at her mother's house right now, pretending everything was fine, avoiding questions about work and her future. Her phone, charging on the nightstand, finally showed a signal. 17 missed calls. 12 voicemails. Dozens of texts, mostly from her mother, progressing from concerned to worried to angry to terrified. The most recent one, sent at 2 a.m., simply read, "Please tell me you're alive." Guilt crashed over her. Sarah quickly typed a message, "I'm so sorry. I'm safe. Missed my train stop and ended up in a small town. Phone had no signal. Long story. We'll call you later. Merry Christmas." Her mother's response came within seconds. "Sarah Elizabeth Chen, you scared me half to death. Call me now." Sarah sighed. But before she could dial, there was a soft knock on the door. "Sarah? You awake?" Rose's voice. "Come in." Rose entered carrying a steaming mug. "Thought you might need coffee before facing the day. Mom's downstairs making enough food to feed an army. It's her Christmas tradition." She handed Sarah the mug and sat on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm living in some kind of alternate reality," Sarah admitted. "Yesterday morning I was a corporate lawyer in the city. Now I'm drinking coffee in a stranger's house in a town I'd never heard of until last night." "Strangers," Rose said thoughtfully. "Funny how fast that word stops applying. You don't feel like a stranger to me." Sarah studied her over the rim of her mug. "Why is everyone here so nice? Is it just Christmas spirit, or is this place actually like this?" Rose laughed. "A bit of both, maybe. But mostly, it's because we know we need each other. In a town this small, you can't afford to be cold to people. You'll see them at the grocery store, at the school, at church. Your lives are woven together whether you like it or not, so you might as well choose to like it." She paused. "I know it probably seems strange to you, coming from the city." "Strange doesn't begin to cover it," Sarah said honestly. "I've lived next to the same people for 2 years and couldn't pick them out of a lineup. Here, I've been around for 12 hours and I feel like I know your life story." "Do you want to?" Rose asked suddenly. "Know my life story, I mean. Really know it, not just the polite summary?" Sarah nodded, curious. Rose took a breath. "I was engaged. 4 years ago. To a guy I met in college, nice enough, good family, everyone approved. We had the venue booked, the dress bought, the whole thing planned. 3 weeks before the wedding, I realized I couldn't do it. Not because he was bad, but because I was trying to fit myself into a shape that wasn't mine. Becoming who I thought I should be instead of who I was." "What happened?" "I called it off. Lost a lot of friends over it. His family still won't speak to me. People in town talked for months." Rose's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the old pain underneath. "But I didn't lose myself. And a year later, I realized I wanted to teach. Really teach, not just as a backup plan. So I came home, moved back in with Mom, and started over." "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Not for a second. Some days are harder than others, sure. I'm 31, single, living with my mom, making less money than most of my college friends spend on their car payments. But I'm happy. Actually happy, not just successful." Rose met her eyes. "You don't have to have it all figured out, Sarah. You just have to be honest about what you actually want." Before Sarah could respond, Margaret's voice bellowed up the stairs. "Girls, breakfast is ready, and these cinnamon rolls won't eat themselves." They headed downstairs to find Margaret's dining room transformed. The table was laden with the promised cinnamon rolls, plus scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, and homemade bread. Thomas was already there, looking slightly bashful about intruding on Christmas morning. "Don't just stand there gawking," Margaret said briskly. "Sit down and eat before it gets cold." As they ate, conversation flowed easily. Thomas talked about his grown children who lived in different states, how he'd moved to Millbrook 15 years ago after his wife died because he needed somewhere quiet to grieve. Margaret shared stories about teaching piano lessons for 40 years before retiring, how half the town could play chopsticks because of her. Rose teased her mother about her competitive streak at the church bingo nights. Sarah found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. These people had nothing to do with her career or her status or her impressive resume. They knew her as the lost woman who showed up in the snow, and somehow that was enough. After breakfast, Margaret shooed them all out of the kitchen and began her Christmas tradition of delivering food to shut-ins around town. "You're coming too," she informed Sarah. "You can't spend Christmas sitting around moping." They loaded Margaret's ancient Volvo with containers of food and drove through the snowy streets of Millbrook. The town was small, maybe 1,500 people, with a main street that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. Local shops with hand-painted signs, a diner with tinsel in the windows, a bookstore with a cat sleeping in the display. At each house they visited, Sarah witnessed the same thing: genuine connection. Margaret didn't just drop off food, she went inside, chatted, listened to stories, held hands, laughed. And she introduced Sarah each time, not as a stranger but as "my friend Sarah, who's spending Christmas with us." By the third stop, Sarah realized something was shifting inside her. The panic that had gripped her since yesterday morning was loosening. Yes, she'd lost her job. Yes, her carefully planned life had fallen apart. But maybe Rose was right. Maybe it was just the life she thought she was supposed to have. The Christmas afternoon was fading into evening when Margaret drove Sarah back to the small train station. Rose sat in the back seat, having insisted on coming along for the goodbye. The cardboard box that had seemed so heavy yesterday now sat on Sarah's lap, and she realized she hadn't even opened it since arriving in Millbrook. The contents that had felt so important 24 hours ago now seemed almost irrelevant. "The 4:32 will get you home by 7, Margaret said, pulling into the empty parking lot. "You'll still have time with your mother if you hurry." Sarah clutched the box tighter, surprised by how much she didn't want to get on that train. "I don't know how to thank you," she began, but Margaret shook her head. "You don't thank family, dear. And that's what we are now, whether you like it or not. You have our numbers. You use them." It wasn't a request. Rose got out of the car and pulled Sarah into a fierce hug. "Promise me something," she said quietly. "Promise me you won't go back to that life just because it's familiar. You deserve better than just surviving." Sarah felt tears well up. "I don't even know what better looks like." "Then figure it out. But don't settle for less than what makes you actually happy just because it's easier." Rose pulled back, her eyes bright. "And visit us. Not just once to be polite. Really visit. We have a spare room with your name on it now." Thomas appeared from inside the station, where he'd been checking the schedule. "Train's running on time. Should be here in 5 minutes." He looked at Sarah with those kind, weathered eyes. "Take care of yourself. And remember, wherever you end up, make sure it's somewhere you can breathe." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She hugged each of them again, trying to memorize this feeling, of being seen, of being valued not for what she did but for who she was. Then she walked toward the platform, her heels clicking on the same icy pavement she'd stumbled across last night. The train appeared right on schedule, its lights cutting through the early dusk. Sarah boarded, found a seat, and pressed her face against the window just as she had yesterday. But this time, she waved. Margaret, Rose, and Thomas stood together on the platform, 3 figures growing smaller as the train pulled away, but somehow not distant at all. Sarah finally opened the box on her lap. Her nameplate, now meaningless. The coffee mug with its sarcastic quote about Monday mornings. The framed photo from college, showing a younger Sarah with ambitious eyes and a confident smile, ready to conquer the world. She'd conquered it, all right. Conquered it right into a corner where she'd forgotten what she was conquering for. Her phone rang. Her mother. Sarah answered, ready for the lecture. "Sarah Elizabeth Chen, you have exactly 30 seconds to explain why I spent Christmas Eve thinking you were dead in a ditch somewhere." "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I had the worst day, and I got lost, and then I found something I didn't know I was looking for." Her mother's anger deflated slightly. "What are you talking about? What did you find?" Sarah looked out at the passing landscape, the small towns and forests and frozen fields. I'm not sure yet. But Mom, I need to tell you something. I lost my job yesterday. They laid me off on Christmas Eve. She braced for disappointment, for worry, for the inevitable questions about what she would do now. Instead, her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then, how do you feel about that? The question caught Sarah off guard. What? How do you feel? Not how you should feel, not what it means for your career. How do you actually feel? Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. Scared. But also, relieved? Is that terrible? Oh, sweetheart. Her mother's voice was gentle. I've been waiting years for you to say something like that. You've been running yourself into the ground, and every time I asked if you were happy, you changed the subject. I thought you loved that job. I thought I did too. But I think I just loved the idea of being successful. I'm not sure I loved the actual life I was living. Then maybe this is your chance to find one you do love. Come home. We'll figure it out together. They talked for the rest of the train ride, really talked, in a way they hadn't in years. Sarah told her about Millbrook, about the church and the dinner and Margaret's spare room. Her mother listened, and Sarah could hear the smile in her voice. These people sound special. They are. Mom, I think I need to go back there. Not to stay necessarily, just to understand what I felt. Is that crazy? No, honey. That's the first sensible thing I've heard you say in years. When Sarah finally arrived at her mother's house, she was greeted with warmth and her favorite childhood meal and no judgment. They stayed up late, talking about possibilities instead of plans, about dreams instead of obligations. And when Sarah finally fell asleep in her childhood bedroom, she felt lighter than she had in years. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She opened her laptop and began researching Millbrook. The town had a small legal aid clinic that had been closed for 2 years due to lack of funding and staff. She found articles about residents who had to travel 2 hours for basic legal help, about families who couldn't afford representation, about a community that needed exactly what she could offer. She thought about her apartment in the city, expensive and empty. Her network of colleagues who were really just contacts. Her impressive salary that she spent on things that didn't matter because she had no time to figure out what did matter. And she thought about Margaret's dining room table, Rose's fierce honesty, Thomas's quiet wisdom, and a whole town that had shown her more kindness in 24 hours than she'd experienced in 3 years of professional success. Sarah picked up her phone and called Rose. I have a crazy idea, she said when Rose answered. But I think I need to try it. 6 weeks later, Sarah drove back to Millbrook, this time intentionally. Her car was packed with everything she owned that mattered, which turned out to be surprisingly little. She'd sublet her apartment, said awkward goodbyes to colleagues who barely seemed to notice she was leaving, and spent long nights applying for grants to reopen the legal clinic. Margaret and Rose were waiting on the front porch when she arrived, and this time it was Margaret who was crying. I knew you'd come back, she said, pulling Sarah into a hug. I just knew it. I can't promise I'll stay forever, Sarah said honestly. I can't promise this will work out. But I have to try. That's all any of us can do, dear. Try, and see what happens. Sarah moved into Margaret's spare room officially this time, paying rent despite Margaret's protests. She spent her days working on the legal clinic, meeting with town leaders, filing paperwork, reaching out to lawyers she knew who might donate time or resources. And slowly, impossibly, it started to come together. The clinic opened 4 months after that Christmas Eve. It was small, just Sarah and a part-time paralegal she'd convinced to take a chance on Millbrook. But on opening day, 15 people showed up needing help. People with landlord disputes and child custody questions and immigration concerns and a dozen other problems that had gone unaddressed because they couldn't afford lawyers and couldn't reach the ones who might help them for free. Sarah worked harder than she ever had at the corporate firm, but it felt different. Every case mattered. Every client was a neighbor. And when she won a case for a single mother fighting for custody, or helped an elderly couple save their home from foreclosure, she went home to Margaret's dinner table and celebrated with people who actually cared. A year after missing her train stop, Sarah sat in the church for another Christmas Eve service. This time she wasn't a stranger in the back pew. She was in the choir, singing slightly off-key but with full voice. Margaret sat in the front row, beaming. Rose was beside her with Ethan, who waved when he saw Sarah. Father Michael's sermon was about unexpected journeys, about how sometimes we have to get lost to find our way home. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, successful on paper, miserable in reality, convinced that her worth was tied to her job title and salary. That woman seemed like a stranger now. After the service, As Sarah helped Thomas blow out the candles, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about what you said when you first got here. About missing your stop. What about it? I don't think you missed it at all. I think you got off exactly where you needed to be." Sarah smiled, looking around at the church filled with people who had become her family, at the town that had become her home, at the life she'd built from the ashes of the one that fell apart. You might be right. She thought about the cardboard box, still sitting in her closet at Margaret's house, unopened for months now. Tomorrow she'd throw it away. She didn't need those remnants of who she used to be. She knew exactly who she was now. That night, as snow began to fall outside Margaret's windows, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with Rose and Margaret, drinking hot chocolate and playing cards and laughing about nothing important. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I'm so proud of the life you're building." Sarah looked up at the two women across from her, at the warm kitchen with its mismatched chairs and cluttered counters, at the life she'd stumbled into by accident and chosen to keep on purpose. She thought about train schedules and missed stops and the strange, beautiful way that endings and beginnings sometimes looked exactly the same until you had the courage to see them differently. "Your turn, Sarah," Rose said, nodding at the cards in her hand. Sarah smiled and played her card. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said softly. And for the first time in her adult life, she absolutely meant it.